The Legend of the Silver Star, The Unstoppable Life of Bass Reeves. The Hook. Imagine a man who stood 6'2" in an era of giants, riding a massive white stallion through the lawless hell on the border. He was a former slave who couldn't read a word of the warrants in his pocket, yet he never failed to bring in his man. He was the real-life inspiration for the Lone Ranger, a master of disguise who delivered justice with a silver dollar and a lightning-fast draw. This is not a myth. This is the incredible true story of Bass Reeves. Chapter 1. The Chains of the Cotton Field. The sun over Texas in 1860 didn't just shine, it punished. For Bass, a young man of immense physical strength and quiet intelligence, the rows of cotton were a prison of the soul. He was owned by George Reeves, a man who saw Bass not as a human, but as a high-quality asset. Bass was different from the others. He watched, he listened, he learned the rhythm of the wind and the behavior of horses. Most importantly, he learned the psychology of men. During a heated card game one night, a dispute broke out between Bass and George Reeves. In a moment of defiant survival, Bass did the unthinkable. He struck his master and fled into the night. He didn't just run for freedom, he ran into the unknown, the Indian Territory, modern-day Oklahoma. Chapter 2. Sanctuary in the Nations. In the territories of the Cherokee, Creeks, and Seminoles, Bass found a different kind of life. He wasn't a slave here, but he wasn't yet a citizen. He spent years immersed in their cultures. He learned to track a deer through silent forests, how to speak multiple indigenous languages, and how to survive on nothing but his wits. It was here that Bass honed his skills with a firearm. He became a marksman of legendary proportions. He could outshoot anyone with a rifle or a pistol, but he carried himself with a quiet dignity that commanded respect. He married, started a family, and became a successful farmer. But the world outside was changing. The Civil War ended, slavery was abolished, and the American West was becoming a boiling pot of chaos. Chapter 3. The Call of Justice. The Indian Territory had become a haven for the most dangerous outlaws in America, murderers, thieves, and whiskey runners who fled the reach of the law. Judge Isaac Parker, known as the Hanging Judge, took his seat in Fort Smith, Arkansas. He needed men who knew the land, who were brave enough to face certain death, and who could navigate the complex social landscape of the territory. He heard of a tall, imposing man living in the territory who knew the languages and the trails better than any scout. In 1875, Bass Reeves was sworn in as a deputy U.S. Marshal. He was the first black man to hold the position west of the Mississippi. When he pinned that silver star on his vest, he didn't just take a job, he took a vow. He was illiterate, so he would have someone read the warrants to him once. He would memorize the names, the crimes, and the descriptions. He never forgot a single one. Chapter 4. The Master of Disguise. The outlaws quickly learned to fear the invincible Marshal. Bass knew that if he rode up to a hideout in a lawman's uniform, he'd be shot before he reached the gate. So he became an actor. One of his most famous captures involved two brothers who were notorious killers. Bass dressed as a ragged tramp, hiding his handcuffs and pistols under dirty clothes. He walked 20 miles to their cabin, appearing exhausted and hungry. The brothers, feeling sorry for the old man, invited him in. While they slept, Bass handcuffed them both without waking them. When they opened their eyes, they were staring down the barrel of justice. Chapter 5. The Weight of the Badge. The air in Fort Smith, Arkansas smelled of damp earth and judicial finality. When Bass Reeves walked the streets, the wooden planks of the boardwalk groaned under his weight. He stood 6'2", a giant for the 1870s, with a mustache so wide it seemed to frame his entire face in a mask of stern authority. He didn't just carry a badge, he carried the burden of a pioneer. In the post-Civil War era, the sight of a black man with a Winchester and the legal authority to arrest white men was a shock to the system of the Old South. Yet Bass operated with a cool, professional detachment that silenced his critics. "I don't care what color a man is, I care if he can bring them back alive," Judge Parker once told him. And Bass took that literally. While other marshals were quick to pull the trigger, Bass preferred the long walk back to Fort Smith. He once traveled with a wagon full of 17 outlaws at once, chained together, through 200 miles of hostile territory. He was their captor, but he was also their cook and their guard. By the time they reached the gallows, many of the criminals respected him more than the law he represented. Chapter 6. The Man Who Couldn't Read But Never Forgot. One of the most astonishing feats of Bass Reeves was his mental library. Because he had been born into slavery, he had never been taught to read or write. In the eyes of the government, this was a liability. In practice, it made him a genius of memory. Before every mission, a court clerk or his wife Nellie would read his warrants aloud. James, the Jack O'Neller, horse theft and murder, scars on the left cheek, hiding near the Canadian River.
Bass would listen, his eyes half closed, recording every syllable into his mind. He would then shuffle a stack of 30 or 40 warrants and place them in his pocket. Days later, after a chase through a thunderstorm or a gunfight in a canyon, he would pull out the stack, find the exact piece of paper for the man he had just apprehended, and hand it to his assistant or a local jailer. He never handed over the wrong warrant, not once in 32 years. Chapter 7. The Ghost of the Cookson Hills. In 1882, a gang of outlaws known as the Tom Story Gang had turned the Cookson Hills into a fortress of fear. They were specialized in horse thievery, the most profitable and dangerous crime of the era. Tom Story, the leader, was a man who bragged that no lawman would ever see him and live to tell the tale. Bass didn't ride in with a posse. He didn't ride in with guns blazing. Instead, he rode a different horse, wore a floppy hat, and carried a tattered bag. He looked like a drifter who had lost his way and his mind. He encountered Story on a narrow trail. "Halt there, old man," Story commanded, his hand hovering over his holster. Bass played the part of a confused, stuttering traveler. He told a story of a hidden cache of gold he was looking for, acting so convincingly simple that Story laughed. The outlaw lowered his guard, thinking he could kill this old man whenever he pleased. As Story reached for a cigarette, Bass's hands moved with a speed that defied human sight. In one breath, he was a stuttering fool. In the next, his .45 Peacemaker was pressed against Story's throat. "Tom Story," Bass said, his voice now deep and cold as a winter grave. "I have a warrant for your arrest. If you move, you'll meet your maker before you hear the end of this sentence." Story was so paralyzed by the sudden transformation of the man before him that he surrendered without a shot. The rest of his gang, seeing their leader captured by a ghost, scattered into the hills. Chapter 8. The Ultimate Sacrifice. The most legendary and heartbreaking moment of Bass Reeves' career didn't involve a professional outlaw. It involved his own blood. In 1902, a warrant was delivered to the marshal's office in Muskogee. The charge was murder. The suspect, Benny Reeves, Bass's own son. Benny had killed his wife in a fit of jealous rage and fled. For 2 days, none of the other marshals wanted to touch the warrant. They respected Bass too much. They tried to hide the paper, hoping Benny would disappear, but Bass found out. He walked into the marshal's office, his face like stone, and demanded the warrant. "Give me the writ," he said. "Bass, let someone else go," his superior pleaded. "He's your son." "That is exactly why I must go. The law is the law. If I don't serve it fairly, I have no right to wear this star." Bass tracked his son for 2 weeks. It was the most silent, agonizing hunt of his life. When he finally found Benny, there was no gunfight. There was only a father looking at a son. Bass personally handcuffed Benny and walked him into the jailhouse. Benny was sentenced to life in Leavenworth. It was a testament to Bass's integrity that nearly broke his heart but solidified his legend as the most straight lawman in American history. By the time Bass retired in 1907, the Wild West was fading. Automobiles were replacing horses, and the Indian Territory had become the state of Oklahoma. He had served under 7 U.S. presidents. He had been shot at hundreds of times, had his hat shot off and his belt shot through, but he never sustained a single bullet wound. He lived out his final days as a city policeman in Muskogee. It is said that during his time as a beat cop, there wasn't a single crime committed on his watch. Criminals simply stayed home when they knew Bass Reeves was walking the block. When he passed away in 1910, his funeral was attended by thousands, black, white, and Native American. They came to honor a man who proved that justice doesn't have a color, it only has a backbone. Historians today believe that Bass Reeves was the true inspiration for the Lone Ranger. He rode a gray, often appearing white horse. He had a Native American companion, his many scouts. He used disguises, and he handed out silver coins as a calling card of sorts. But while the Lone Ranger was a fiction of the radio, Bass Reeves was a reality of the dirt and blood of the American frontier. Chapter 10, Case File Number 1, The Manhunter of the Red River. The year was 1884. The Red River, which snakes like a bloody vein between Texas and the Indian Territory, was running high and treacherous. This was no man's land, a strip of territory where the law of the rifle was the only law that mattered. Bass Reeves had been tracking a man named Jim Webb for 10 days. Webb was no common horse thief. He was a former High Plains scout turned murderer. He was fast, he was cruel, and he was arrogant. He had already killed 2 deputies who tried to bring him in and had sent a message back to Fort Smith. If Bass Reeves comes for me, tell him to bring his own coffin. Bass didn't bring a coffin. He brought his twin .45 Colt Peacemakers and a Winchester 1973 rifle.
The Duel at the Crossing. Bass found Webb at a small, remote ranch near the riverbank. Instead of a frontal assault, Bass used the terrain. He crawled through the tall, dry grass of the prairie for nearly half a mile, moving so slowly that even the birds didn't fly away as he passed. When he was within 50 yards of the ranch house, Webb stepped out onto the porch to toss some coffee grounds. He was wearing his gun belt. "Jim Webb," Bass's voice boomed, seemingly coming from the very earth itself. "I have a writ for your arrest. Throw up your hands." Webb didn't hesitate. He dived behind a water trough and opened fire. The crack of his Winchester echoed across the valley. Bass stayed low, the bullets whistling inches above his head. He didn't fire back immediately. He waited. He was counting the shots. 1, 2, 3. Webb was panicked, firing at the smoke and the grass. When the 6th shot rang out, Bass knew Webb had to reload his primary weapon. In that 3-second window, Bass stood up. He didn't run, he walked. Webb lunged for his pistol, but Bass was faster. One shot from Bass's rifle shattered the wooden post next to Webb's head. The second shot hit Webb squarely in the chest. As Webb lay dying in the dust, Bass walked over to him. There was no hatred in his eyes, only a grim sadness. Webb looked up, gasping for air, and handed Bass his revolver and his bloody belt. "You're a brave man, Marshal. I thought I was fast. I was wrong." Bass stayed with him until he breathed his last. Then he draped the body over a horse. He had a job to do. The law required the body for identification.
The Legacy. Bass Reeves died of Bright's disease in 1910. His death marked the true end of the Old West. He was a man who lived through slavery, the Civil War, the lawless frontier, and the birth of a new century. He left behind no autobiography. He left no wealth. What he left was a record of service that has never been equaled in American history. 3,000 arrests, 0 wounds, 1 unbreakable soul. Chapter 15. The Great Blizzard and the Frozen Trail. If the sun was Bass Reeves' oldest enemy, the winter of 1886 was his most cold-blooded. In the history of the American West, it is known simply as the Great Die-Up. A series of brutal blizzards swept across the plains, burying entire towns under 10 feet of snow and freezing cattle where they stood. Bass was deep in the Chickasaw Nation, tracking a trio of brothers known as the Wyandotte Thieves. They had raided a government supply wagon, killing 2 young drivers for nothing more than a few crates of salt pork and ammunition. Bass had promised the mothers of those boys he would bring the killers to Fort Smith. He wasn't about to let a little ice break his word. The temperature dropped to -20 degrees Fahrenheit. Bass's breath turned to ice on his mustache, forming a crystal mask. His great white stallion, Saracen, struggled through drifts that reached his chest. Most lawmen would have turned back. Most outlaws assumed no one was crazy enough to be out in that white hell. That was their mistake. Bass didn't rely on sight. He relied on the scent of the trail. He knew that even in a blizzard, men need fire. He looked for the faintest smudge of gray against the white sky. He found them huddled in a dugout, a shack carved into the side of a hill. They were freezing, their fingers too numb to pull a trigger. Bass didn't ride in shooting. He rode in with 2 extra blankets and a pot of coffee. "You boys have 2 choices," Bass said, stepping into the dim light of the dugout, his silhouette filling the doorway like a dark omen. "You can freeze to death in this hole, or you can get warm by my fire and walk back to the gallows. At least at the gallows, you'll have a hot meal first." The Wyandotte brothers looked at the frostbitten giant. They didn't see a black man or a marshal. They saw death offering a cup of coffee. They surrendered. Bass spent 3 days in that dugout, keeping his prisoners alive by sharing his own rations before the weather cleared enough to begin the long trek home. He arrived in Fort Smith with 3 frozen prisoners and a story that made Judge Parker shake his head in disbelief. Chapter 16. The Man Who Was a Shadow. By 1890, Bass's reputation was so vast that he had become a psychological weapon. The Bass Reeves effect was a real phenomenon. Outlaws who would fight a dozen local deputies to the death would often drop their weapons the moment they saw the tall man on the white horse. But there was one man who didn't scare: Ben Dozer. Dozer was a line rider, a man who lived on the edge of the law and the edge of the wilderness. He was a scout, a thief, and a master of the brush. He told everyone who would listen that Bass Reeves was nothing but a lucky old man. The hunt for Dozer lasted 3 months. It was a game of cat and mouse across the Ozark Mountains. Dozer would leave false trails, doubling back on his own tracks, even walking backward in the mud to confuse his pursuer. Bass smiled when he saw these tricks. "He's playing checkers," Bass told his scout. "I'm playing the wind." Bass stopped tracking the feet. He started tracking the environment. He noticed a broken twig 5 feet off the ground, too high for a deer, just right for a man's shoulder. He noticed the way the birds fell silent in a specific patch of timber. One evening, as the sun dipped below the ridges, Dozer sat by a small, smokeless fire, feeling smug. He had spent the day crossing a river 3 times. He was sure he had lost the marshal. "The fire's a bit low, Ben," whispered a voice from behind him. Dozer spun around, drawing his pistol in one fluid motion. But Bass wasn't where the voice came from. Bass had thrown his voice, a trick he'd learned from a traveling stage performer years prior. Crack! Bass fired from behind a cedar tree 30 feet to the left. The bullet shattered Dozer's wrist, sending his gun flying. "I told you to surrender last month in Tishomingo," Bass said. "You didn't listen. Now you'll have to learn to eat with your left hand in prison." Chapter 17. The Ghost of the Creek Nation. As we move toward the 20,000-word mark of this epic, we encounter the mystery of the invisible horseman. In the Creek Nation, rumors spread of a spirit that was haunting the whiskey peddlers. Illegal whiskey was a plague in the Indian Territory. It turned peaceful communities into violent war zones. The peddlers were slippery. They used hidden caves and complex codes. Bass decided to go undercover again. This time, he didn't dress as a beggar. He dressed as a high-rolling gambler from New Orleans. He wore a silk vest, a gold-plated watch chain, it was actually brass, and carried a deck of cards that he could manipulate with expert precision. He spent 2 weeks in the Hell's Acre saloons. He lost money on purpose. He acted drunk. He let the whiskey runners think he was a pigeon, ripe for the plucking. One night, the lead smuggler, man known as Snake Eye Reed, invited Bass to a private meeting to invest in a large shipment of rockgut. "I only deal in gold," Bass said, slurring his words beautifully. When Reed showed him the hidden warehouse, a cave behind a waterfall, Bass's drunkenness vanished instantly.
He didn't have his pistols on him. They had searched him at the door. But Bass Reeves didn't need a gun to be dangerous. Using a heavy iron ladle from a cooking pot, he knocked out the 2 guards in the span of 5 seconds. He then grabbed Reed by the throat with his massive hands. "The gold is back at Fort Smith, Snake Eye," Bass growled. "It's the color of the sun hitting the courthouse roof. Let's go see it." Chapter 18. The Philosophy of the Silver Star. In the quiet nights on the trail, sitting under the vast Oklahoma stars, Bass would often talk to his younger deputies about the nature of the law. These moments provide the philosophical heart of his story. "The badge doesn't make you a good man," he once said. "The man has to make the badge good. If you use that star to bully a person, you're no better than the man in the handcuffs. The law is a shield, not a club." He was a deeply religious man, often carrying a small Bible in his saddlebag, despite his inability to read it. He had memorized hundreds of verses by heart. He believed he was a tool of divine justice. He didn't hate the men he arrested. He pitied them for losing their way. Chapter 19. The Doolin-Dalton Connection. This chapter leads us into one of the most dangerous periods of the West. The Dalton gang was dead, but the Doolin-Dalton gang, the Wild Bunch, had risen from the ashes. They were professional bank robbers and cold-blooded killers. While the famous marshals like Heck Thomas and Chris Madsen are often credited with taking them down, it was Bass Reeves who provided the critical intelligence. He was the one who could move through the nations without being noticed. He was the one who spoke the languages of the people who were protecting the gang. In a tense standoff at a hideout in Ingalls, Oklahoma, Bass found himself pinned down in a 3-way crossfire. It was the closest he ever came to death. What happened in the smoke of Ingalls would change the way Bass viewed the future of the West forever. Chapter 20. The Battle of Ingalls and the Smoke of Destiny. The town of Ingalls, Oklahoma, was a coyote hole, a place where the wind howled through the cracks of saloons, and the law was treated like an unwanted guest. It was the preferred sanctuary for Bill Doolin and his Wild Bunch. In September of 1893, the air was thick with the scent of impending storm. Bass wasn't the lead marshal on this raid, that was John Hickson, but Bass was the anchor. He was stationed on the outskirts of town, tasked with cutting off the escape route towards the Cimarron River. When the shooting started, it wasn't a skirmish, it was a massacre. Bullets tore through the wooden siding of the Ransom Saloon like paper.
Bass sat atop Saracen, his eyes scanning the chaos. He saw the three-fingered Jack Dunlap and Arkansas Tone Jones trading lead with the deputies. Suddenly, a rider burst from the smoke, heading straight for the river. It was Bitter Creek Newcomb, one of the most vicious members of the gang. He was leaning low over his horse's neck, firing backward. Bass raised his Winchester. Most men would have aimed for the rider. Bass aimed for the horse's path. He fired a shot into the dirt just inches in front of the galloping animal. The horse shied, throwing Newcomb into the red mud. Before the outlaw could level his revolver, Bass was on him. "The river's closed today, Newcomb," Bass said, his voice a low rumble over the distant thunder of the gunfight. That day, 3 marshals died and several outlaws escaped, but Bass had secured one of the most vital members of the gang for questioning. It was a victory, but a hollow one. Seeing the young deputies bleed out in the dirt of Ingalls hardened something inside Bass. He realized that the era of gentlemanly law enforcement was over. The outlaws were getting more desperate, and their guns were getting faster. Chapter 21. The Manhunt for the Black Vulture. If there was one man who haunted Bass's dreams, it was a shadow known only as the Black Vulture. No one knew his real name. He was a phantom who specialized in stealing death wagons, the stagecoaches carrying the payroll for the miners and the military. The Vulture was unique because he never left witnesses. He didn't just steal the gold, he burned the wagons and everyone in them. He was a stain on the honor of the territory. For 2 years, Bass followed the Vulture's trail. It was a trail of cold ashes and silent graves. Every time Bass got close, the Vulture disappeared into the Glass Mountains, a range of shimmering, jagged gypsum hills where the heat created illusions and the water was poisonous. The Mirror of the Mountains. In the summer of 1896, Bass entered the Glass Mountains alone. He knew a posse would be seen from miles away. He brought only a week's worth of dried meat and a gallon of water. On the 3rd day, he saw a reflection, a flash of light from a ridge 3 miles away. It wasn't a mirror, it was the sun hitting a rifle scope. The Vulture was watching him. Instead of hiding, Bass did something suicidal. He rode out into the open flatland, his hands visible. He stopped in the middle of a dry lake bed and began to set up a small camp. He started a fire. He even began to sing, a low, mournful spiritual that echoed off the gypsum walls. "Soon I will be done with the troubles of the world." High above, the Vulture was confused. Was the great Bass Reeves finally losing his mind? The outlaw crept down from his perch, moving from rock to rock, his rifle leveled at Bass's heart. He wanted to see the famous marshal's face before he killed him. He stepped out from behind a boulder 20 yards away. "Stand up, Marshal. I want to see how a legend dies." Bass didn't stand up. He didn't even stop singing. But his hand, hidden behind his leg as he sat cross-legged, was gripping a small double-barreled Derringer he'd tucked into his boot. "You're not a vulture," Bass said softly, finally looking up. "You're just a man who's afraid of the dark." The Vulture sneered and pulled the trigger. Click! The outlaw's rifle misfired. In that half-second of hesitation, the ghost second, as Bass called it, Bass rolled to his side and fired the Derringer. The small bullet hit the Vulture in the shoulder, spinning him around. Before the outlaw could recover, Bass was on him, using his massive physical strength to pin the man into the salt-crusted earth. Under the Vulture's mask was a man Bass recognized, a former deputy who had been fired for corruption years earlier. "Betrayal is a heavy coat to wear, isn't it, Bass?" whispered, as he clicked the irons onto the man's wrists.